The Cistercian Abbey of Tintern is often described as one of the greatest monastic ruins in Wales, and whether you approach it from Chepstow or Monmouth, it certainly makes a great first impression. Founded in 1131, it was only the second Cistercian monastery in Britain, and it remained a centre for monastic life and prayer for over 400 years. Very little of the first monastic buildings remain, and most of what's left today dates from the 13th century. And if you're interested in medieval monastic life, it's a great place to explore. But for a visiting stonemason like myself, it also provides me with a perfect location to test out a building theory used by the master masons who laid out this great church in 1269. And there's only one way to test that theory, and that's to start measuring. We found it, the original measurement that the master mason laid this church out with. This is called a rod, a perch or a pole. And the length of a perch or a pole varied throughout the country. That's why we have to uncover the secret of that measurement. Here at Tintern, it's 18 feet. It's 18 feet between the centre of each pier. Across the nave, it's twice that. Twice 18, it's 36 feet across the nave. From the base of the column to the top of the capital, it's one pole. From the top of the capital up to the centre of the first arch, it's another pole, and so on and so forth. This is why when people look at a medieval building, they talk about rhythm and harmony. It's because there's such a continuity of measurement. The original master mason did exactly what I've just done. He took his pole, he laid out the ground plan, and then he started to mark out the height of the church. Then the smaller features were a quarter, a half, or 3/4. But the original measurement is like a secret that's lost to us. But if you know where to look for it, you can find it. And it's such a tangible link to the past. The last thing to understand when marking out a church is the term you often hear is called ABBEY. Now, that's the distance between the column from the nave to the outside wall. We're in the south aisle of the east end. What does ABBEY mean? Well, basically, it's the distance between two piers, and that distance, as we can see with the pole, is returned to the outside wall. Basically, what you have is you have a square. I'm now in the centre of that square. One column, a column there and a column there. That is what's called a bay. So when you hear somebody say the east end of Tintern Abbey is 4 bays long, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bays long. One of the best things about ruined abbeys is that it gives you the chance to literally see inside the structure. And what a great detail this is to find. It's called a keystone or a boss, and it's the thing that locks a stone rib vault together. This stone is actually upside down. It would be turned over like this, and these are very important. 1, 2, 3, 4 faces. Those faces connect with the 4 stone ribs of a vault. The ribs are set and laid on wooden formers, waiting to receive this. Up comes the keystone, over it goes, and sets down to marry up with the 4 cross ribs. Once it's in position, the formwork comes away from below, and the whole vault stands up on its own. Now, this is a huge stone. It's about 1/4 of a ton, and because it's so large, there's a nice area in the centre of it that's just ready to receive some carving. You can see we've got some really nice foliage carving, carved by the stonemason. The other thing we know about this area is that we know, although the roof's not there and the vaulting's gone, we can tell exactly what type of vaulting was there. It was called a quadripartite ribbed vault. All that means is that 4 ribs crossed, and this keystone locked them in position and closed the vault. We've also got the rest of the bosses set all around this area, so we know exactly where they went. One of the most remarkable features at Tintern Abbey is just how much of its great church has survived intact. But one aspect most noticeable by its absence is the roof, and not just the vaulting, but the lead that covered it. When the abbey was surrendered to the king in 1536, anything of worth was sent straight to his treasury. The lead on the roof was valued at £124 and was still being melted down by the king's plumbers in 1541. But not all churches suffered the same fate as Tintern, and those that survived the dissolution kept their lead roofs. Today they still need the skills and attention of lead casters to keep the weather out. It's been over 400 years since Cistercian monastic life was practiced here at Tintern Abbey in southeast Wales, but everywhere you look there are clues that tell us how the monks might have lived. Keith Underwood is one of the guides at Tintern Abbey and provides a more tangible link to its Cistercian history, as he often assumes the guise of a choir monk to help bring these ruins to life.
I mean, I dress as a choir monk, essentially, because there are 2 groups of monks here. There are the beer-drinking worker monks at the west end of the abbey, and I'm a choir monk, so I'm quite specific. I'm the one who has to adopt the silence and all the rigours of a Cistercian life, so I'm here to pray, essentially.
And this abbey was the first Cistercian abbey in Wales. Can you tell me how that came about?
Well, it was founded by Walter Fitzrichard de Clare, who was the Lord of Chepstow, his lordship having been created in 1115, well before the Cistercians came to this country. Waverley was the first in Surrey, and it was prestigious actually to have a Cistercian abbey on your land. So Walter, being one of the great Clare family, just had to have this. And this is why it was founded in this area particularly.
And is that what we see today?
It's not the original, no, not at all. This is a most un-Cistercian abbey that you've seen today. It's very lush, very voluptuous. This is saying more about Roger Bigod, Earl of Norfolk, who completed the rebuilding. The Marshall family having started rebuilding the old abbey, and this is the ultimate. This is the climax of the decorated architecture, I suppose.
Which parts of the monastic building still left give us an atmosphere of what it was like in medieval times?
Well, there are 2 particularly. There's the warming house, which perhaps we come back to, and the infirmary, where we're sitting on a broken wall here. The infirmary was an enormous hospital, essentially, and there's very little of it left now, so you really have to use your imagination to establish what was here. But I find it interesting because after the Black Death, once the lay brother system had collapsed and they were having to hire in servants, they also had to reuse their buildings, and the infirmary was really turned into a glorified old folks home for these people called Corodians, essentially fairly rich people who came in to live the rest of their lives here. And the part that interests me particularly is the thing they call the reredos, the place behind the dormitory, which is the enormous toilet blocks, and there are 2 amazing toilet blocks. Always raises laughter with the children, of course. You have to say that there was no privacy, you all went to the loo together. But it is a place where you have to imagine, having looked after elderly relatives, that people were dying in this hospital, and bodies were having to be prepared and washed for funerals. Dementia in those days probably existed, so you would have a room equipped to take this sort of thing into account. So I always feel, having looked after elderly people, that this comes quite close to home, in fact. I came in when I was a child, and as a boy, of course, the first thing you do is immediately to climb into the drain, where you can travel quite a long way underground. Unfortunately, they've blocked off a lot of this now, but this was the start of me actually understanding what was going on. But I'm still doing it, I'm still uncovering interesting secrets.
It was a tough life being a monk, even if you weren't old and infirm. The only other fire, aside from the one in the kitchen or the abbot's house, was to be found in the warming house. But you know what they say, where there's pleasure, there's pain.
And this is the warming house, which I think is probably the most important part in the whole monastery. And again, it's lost its lovely doorway again.
But there's still some details inside here, isn't there?
Excellent, yes. We have the vault. We have this a good teaching vault here. See how they span their spaces, including the church.
Yeah. The original vault is still there.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what date this is, but it screams sort of 1200, something like that.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, everything about it.
It's those really sort of thick, heavy voussoirs going up to the central boss.
And of course, it would have been plastered and much neater than that. But it's in very good condition. I mean, some of this is brilliant.
Yeah. And the fireplace would be over here with the flue going up there.
That's right. The great canopy, you'll see part of it, typical medieval canopy, warming both sides, in fact.
And it was a huge fire in here,
Oh,
wasn't
enormous,
it?
yes.
Yeah.
With sheds the other side to take the wood for the timber and so on.
And so the monks would be sort of stood in the or sat in the centre here.
Well, there were benches all the way around,
yes.
So they could sit, because it must have been quite hot, in fact.
Yeah. And less pleasantly, of course, they would have been bled in here, wouldn't they?
Oh, indeed, yes, this was the place. Possibly because of the heat of the fire being good for their circulation. You've got to think about medieval humours and so on. They were being released from their bodies, whether or not they liked it. After which they went off to the infirmary for 4 days to eat a very nice diet of meat, which was not allowed in the rest of the abbey. So it was really good news, bad news situation.
Everywhere you look at Tintern, there are clues, not only about how these buildings were used, but about how they were constructed. And if you know where to look for the right clues, it's easy to fill in the gaps. There's a very old saying about lime mortar that goes, "Look after me for 1 year, and I will look after your children for 1,000. Lime mortar is the key to why medieval buildings are still standing. And here it is. There is lime mortar. It's nothing to do with the cement that we use today. It's a natural material, and it was used even before the Roman times. The secret about it is this. It acts as a cushion between two stones. That cushion allows, gradually as the building rises, allows the whole building to move and settle into position. Buildings are always on the move due to the weather. And when they move and when they settle, the material that is between each stone needs to be soft and malleable. And that's exactly what lime mortar is. Remember, it's totally different to cement. Cement is rock hard, it's harder than the stone itself, and it will actually destroy a building. Now, in Britain, we lost our heritage. We lost our lime mortar heritage. In came the Industrial Revolution, in came modern cement. The Victorians restored cathedrals and abbeys with them, and they destroyed them. Luckily, in the last 20 years, we've relearnt our lime mortar heritage. And today, most of the cathedrals and the restoration work done in this country is starting to use again lime mortar. Now there's an oyster shell. In fact, they're all the way through the joint of these two stones. But what are they doing there? Oyster shells were used by medieval masons to butt two stones together. Before this stone was set upon this one, a layer of lime mortar was laid across the bed. Then these oyster shells were set at points along because they gave the right size of joint between the two stones. This one was lowered on top, settled on the oyster shells, and they're still there today for us to see.